So now I have to do something that's very strange, and I've never done it before. I have to introduce myself as a keynote speaker, which is kind of a bit weird. So I can tell you that the next speaker is absolutely brilliant, incredibly accomplished. No, that's not true. But it is really nice for me, having stood on this stage 3 times in the past, to actually tell you a little bit about what I think. And I'm particularly grateful to Marie Angelica, who's kind of set me up to talk about what I would like to talk about before we get into the main body of the conference, and that is to do with this word collaboration. And I'm going to use urban sanitation as my example to talk a little bit about the fact that collaboration is something that we have a real tendency to think of it as a benign, nice thing to do. And we talk a lot about partnerships, and we talk a lot about engagement and multi-stakeholder processes. And I think sometimes we should be a bit more honest about the very political nature of sanitation and water and the very political nature of collaboration. So I'm just going to say a few words. If I say too many, the timekeepers down there will be extremely strict. And this really follows on from what Marie Angelica has been talking about. So I'm thinking about urban space, and I'm thinking about resilience and resilient sanitation. So just taking this idea of many services and many ways of solving the problem, I also want to think a little bit about how would we like our systems to be resilient to future shocks. So what does resilience mean? So it means lots of things to lots of people, but I'm thinking about 4 things here. One is we want to deliver wash services, but in this case, urban sanitation services that can withstand shocks. We want systems that are affordable and are therefore likely to go on being operated in the long term. We want systems that are technically sustainable, so they actually can function. And we want systems that show a clear net gain to everyone. Because one thing we know in life is that people will do what they perceive to be in their own interests. So we've really got to think about the incentives in sanitation. So just starting with withstanding shocks. And when we think about shocks, we usually think about climate. But I actually think the biggest shock that an urban sanitation system has to withstand is the one we think of as the inevitable problem, which is population growth. We think about population growth as a fact of life, as being a big problem. I don't think we think about it smartly enough. I think we need to think about population growth and the ways in which that happens in cities. So it happens on an annual cycle, for example, in response to seasonal signals. We have people moving in and out of cities. Is this microphone bouncing? It feels very echoey to me. Is it okay? Okay. It might happen on a sporadic but permanent basis as urban families split up and resettle, or as rural families move into the city. And it happens in response to strong climate signals. So you have all these different kind of dynamic population processes happening. And the thing that suggests to me is that we need sanitation services that can respond very fast. And what that means is that there has to be a very low marginal cost of extending any service that you're providing. We've got to be in a position to rapidly deliver services to anybody who turns up. It's no good delivering sanitation to only half the people in your city just because the other half of the people have decided to live where you don't want them to be. Because, surprisingly, just because people are living where you don't want them to be doesn't stop them having a crap in the morning, and their crap is actually quite bad for everybody else. So, we've got to respond to that, and it's got to be low marginal cost. And that suggests to me that we should really be thinking about sanitation in a much more modular way. We've got to be able to add pieces of the system, particularly at the sort of service delivery end, at the point of production of the crap, if you like, really easily and really dynamically. So if you look at eThekwini, one of the most interesting things that happens in eThekwini is that every year the municipal WASH team get together and they look at remote sensing data to see where people are settling in the city, and they respond to that in real time, thinking about how they're going to extend services to those new communities. Second shock is the one that Marie Angelica mentioned, which is the weather. We like to talk about climate change. I'm working on a big project in climate change, and I get into terrible trouble in Africa because I'm often saying, climate change is really important, but the sanitation situation is so bad that I'm not actually worrying about climate change very much at all. I'm just trying to get what we have to do what we need it to do. So it's easier, if you can't get people to think about climate change, to just think about weather. And we know that sanitation systems respond quite badly to floods. So floods is the thing to think about, and the connection to drainage, and the connection to solid waste. Because turns out, if it pours with rain and your drains are full of sludge and solid waste, they don't work very well. Who knew? So we've really got to think about interconnecting sectors, but also building in two things to the sanitation system. Redundancy, because there will be catastrophic floods, so there will be bits of the system that stop working. There will be roads which are flooded. There will be bridges which get washed away. So we need to have built-in redundancy. And we also need to think about disaggregating the system so that we limit the extent to which a single bridge where the sludge tankers can't now go because it's been damaged in a flood disrupts the entire fecal sludge management system. So we need to think about that. The final form of disruption that I want to think about is political disruption. We're very keen in our sector to talk about champions. Oh, we need champions for the sanitation sector. That's true, they're very useful, but there's a problem with champions. They're very useful, so other people want them, so they get moved out of the way to do something slightly more glamorous than urban sanitation. Or they're really disruptive and annoying, so they get moved out of the way so they could just make a little bit less trouble, thank you very much, and they get sent as ambassador to the UK or something not very important. So the point is, we can't rely on our champions. So what do we do about this? Well, it's my belief that this is where cultural shifts are really important. If we've learned something from Rural Wash over the years, it's that success comes when expectations shift, when everybody expects to be experiencing a really great level of service, then everybody expects to be experiencing the really great level of service. And we don't think about this enough in urban sanitation. We don't think about selling the idea of living in a clean, healthy environment, and that is what you should expect from your local government, come what may. So I like to think about this as the normalization of services, and we've got to get away from the idea that there are low-cost solutions for poor people and high-cost solutions for high people, and that somehow this is not as good as this. What we've got to think about is everybody wants a safe, hygienic place to go and have their morning crap. I'm sorry to say, but they really do. And everybody wants to expect not to have to do too much beyond that. So we need to have a system which actually helps people to do that. Okay, so those are the three sort of shock issues that I want to talk about. The second aspect of resilience is affordability. We've got to think about how we're going to pay for these services. They're expensive. We estimate typically in the systems that we've been looking at in recent research, over the lifetime of an urban sanitation system, operational costs, including ongoing maintenance and repair, account for between 80 and 95% of the total life cycle cost of an urban sanitation system. So we look a bit silly if we haven't worked out how that's going to be accounted for in the urban budget. Most of the cities that Maria-Angelica mentioned, and all of the successful cities that we see around the world, they're successful primarily because they do a really boring thing, which is that they prepare a budget, a realistic budget with people and resources and fuel for the trucks. That's a good plan. And fuel for the pumps and all of those other things which are needed. Third aspect of resilience is technical. We need sanitation systems that win friends and support in the wider political landscape. So we've got to think about how sanitation contributes to other key elements of the economy. We've got to look at the opportunity to sell sanitation as an important part of food chains and food security, the energy market, and also an important part of protecting the environmental commons. So we need to sell sanitation on its virtues rather than on its problems. Now, this net positive contribution is quite complicated because there's a lot of misconceptions about risk. There's a lot of misconceptions about what's good and what's bad. I mean, my own particular bugbear is that people always worry about groundwater, perpetually worrying about the fact that sanitation systems can contaminate groundwater, even if you're in a city where the groundwater is absolutely contaminated with cadmium or mercury already, so nobody should be drinking it. But people very rarely compare that to the risk of discharging effluent from septic tanks, for example, into open drains. So that kind of inability to understand the real virtue of a system that is protecting your most important resources and reducing, as much as we can, the risk of people being exposed to a hazard. So that's a big sort of intellectual shift that has to happen in a lot of cities. The final aspect of resilience I want to talk about is long-run commitment. We need everybody in a sanitation system to want to do the right thing. And my illustration of this is always that old chestnut, which many of you who've heard me speak before will know I go on about rather a lot. All over the world, local authorities charge tanker operators to dump sludge in wastewater treatment plants or in fecal sludge treatment plants, which makes sense if you think, as a matter of principle, that a treatment plant must cover its own costs. But why would we think that? That doesn't make any sense. The treatment plant isn't there to make money. It's there to make sure that fecal waste is kept out of the environment. So I think thinking about the incentives, and actually in many places, a positive financial incentive so that truck drivers and tanker operators are actually encouraged to come and dump the waste where they want to, rather than slipping it out into a drain, would be a very smart move. So just trying to think about those long-term incentives that are faced by people who are all very sensible. So therefore, a resilient urban sanitation system has to be modular, it needs to be socially acceptable, it needs appropriate financial structures, it has to make a net positive contribution to the urban economy, and it has to be affordable. So that's quite complicated. Now, the interesting thing about this is what happens when you start to think about scale. Because all of those things could be achieved, in some cases, by having like a little standalone system in a corner of the city. So the famous case is the Orangi pilot project, which provided sewers for 67,000 households in Karachi. Very, very successful project. But what everyone always forgets about Orangi is it's on top of a hill. So the Orangi project was primarily successful because the people in that community could solve their own problem without having to worry about the rest of the network. But for everybody else, what we need is a city that provides a strong spinal network to which local action can be connected. So a strong, well-planned central network designed to respond to potential future growth. So we want people to be able to say, oh, some new people have popped up here. What's the best way to give them decent toilets that provide them with the sort of services that they want? Oh, well, we better extend our piped network over there, or we better provide a transfer station nearby so they can empty their pit latrines. Whatever it is, we need the centre to be stronger, not weaker, just because we're talking about engaging in partnerships with other people to provide the services. Now, I think the biggest challenge that we have, therefore, is that we have the wrong institutions in place in many cases. In order to be strong, but be able to engage flexibly with your kind of local challenges, you need to be quite a different type of organisation than to a lot of the very sort of rigid, traditional utility service providers who are basically set up to design a single monolithic service in a very steady, planned way. What we really need is sort of new types of organisations, and luckily we don't have to think about this in a vacuum, because clever people in places like McKinsey tell us all the time what makes a successful organisation. If you're interested, McKinsey think that the 5 trademarks of an agile organisation are vision, empowered teams, rapid decision-making and lesson learning, dynamic people encouraged to innovate, and the use of the best enabling technologies. Sounds exciting, doesn't it? It doesn't actually sound very much like the local authority in the small town that I lived in Pakistan for 5 years. They weren't really like that, surprisingly. They were very good people, but they weren't in an organisation that sounds like that. So we need to start looking for other organisation examples that we can borrow from. And luckily, there are cities who are doing this really well. So one of the things that I think is really important is when we look at the success stories that Marianne Kettlicker is talking about, we mustn't look at the technology. What we need to look at is the ability of the city to provide core services and then dynamically respond to shocks and change. That's the story of those successes. It's true in Etequini, it's true in Lima, it's true in Manila, it's true in the city of Stockholm, it's true in successful cities. So we really need to be looking at that. Now, hopefully you can see that this sort of vision I have for a resilient, modular, responsive, embedded sanitation system also is very much sort of revolves around the idea that you can break the system into pieces that could be managed in different ways. Central parts can be managed centrally, but the end of the pipe, if you like, the point of production, in some cases may be managed by somebody else. So we could be making much more space for condominial management arrangements. The South Americans know how to do this. Somehow in the rest of the world, we really resist this idea of what we would call vertical unbundling. So the idea that I provide trunk services and you provide retail services in a community or a slum. There are examples of this, and we need to be looking at it. But the big challenge for cities, I think, is to work out what's the right level to disaggregate this responsibility. And of course, that can change over time. So I always say to people, you know, when I used to live in Delhi in the 1990s and the utility wasn't doing very well at all, if I looked out of the window and saw somebody digging a hole in the street, I used to assume that they were stealing the pipes. Whereas, where I live now in Manchester in the UK, I mean, the UK is a pretty shoddy place, but at least when I look out of the window and I see someone digging a hole in the road, I guess they're probably fixing the pipes. So there is something about what is the level at which we have to disaggregate management responsibility. And one of the things we have to think about is if you want local management to happen, it's got to happen without excessive transaction costs. It's got to be easy for a container-based sanitation entrepreneur to engage with the city. It's got to be easy for a guy who wants to run a fecal sludge management business to engage with the city. It's got to be easy for a woman who wants to set up a decentralized condominial sewerage network and sell services to her community to do that. There's a very strong inverse relationship between those transaction costs and the kind of credibility of the state provider or the city. So we've really got to think about this as a public institutional challenge. We need cities with credibility to engage outwards. Some of you who are familiar with Eleanor Ostrom's work will also know that at the local level we have to make sure that the transaction costs are affordable. So we need to think about local management in terms of places where you have clear boundaries around the resource. So we need to know who am I responsible for, and I'm not responsible for everybody, I'm just responsible for these people. Clear rules for membership of the group, you're either in or you're out. Congruence between the rules of provision and the actual local circumstances. Let's not have a regulation that says you cannot build any kind of on-site sanitation in this city, in a city that has a lot of on-site sanitation. That is not helpful. An effective arena where public choices can be made. So transparency in the assignation of these responsibilities. Mutual monitoring of performance. Let's be more honest about how well these systems are working. Graduated sanctions and rewards, mechanisms for conflict resolution. So it sounds complex, but what it really means, it comes back down to the fact that not only technically does a city need to be robust and strong, but also institutionally it has to be robust and strong. We need a rule of law, and we need a set of standard contracting mechanisms, or compacts, if you like, to enable the city to engage flexibly with multiple service providers. And that type of safe space for collaboration, I would argue, cannot be brought into existence simply through wishful thinking. It doesn't happen just because you have a few workshops. It doesn't happen because everybody sits down and chats to each other. And if you ever are in a workshop where everybody's sitting down and chatting with each other, please check that the right people are in the room, because I can guarantee that invariably they are not. You'll be having a lovely conversation about how, oh yes, you know, we could have this collaboration between this community group here and the utility service provider, and we can make some sort of connection between us and have a contract. And then you'll find out that the mayor is not in the room, and neither are his contracts department. Or back at the head office, somebody's just about to bulldoze that community that you are nicely negotiating with. So we need the right people to be in the room. It takes a long time. So I do quite a lot of work with Shack Dwellers International. They work from the community level up, and they really will tell you that this takes a long time. I sometimes wonder why communities don't just hire a digger, actually, and collect all the shit that's in their drains and around their streets and go dump it outside a swanky mall, just to kind of, you know, hasten the process. But let's say that there are more constructive ways of getting to where we want to be. So there's lots I could say. But what I really want to say is, in urban sanitation, and therefore I think in a lot of other parts of the wash sector, What we're really talking about is an institutional transformation from a monolithical service provision model to a collaborative partnership model, but that is not an easy, benign, happy process. It's a negotiation, and there will be winners and losers. And the way we can make that as painless as possible is to be very clear, very transparent, to offer clear, fair contract mechanisms for people to engage with. And I think if we do that, we can really start to make progress in the urban sector. So that's what I have to say, and I think I just about hit my own time. It's quite hard to see from up here. I'll know that for next time. Thank you very much. Thank you, Barbara. That was really interesting, fascinating, brilliant. The audience really enjoyed it. Thank you so much. Okay, so now it's nearly time for coffee. That is the weirdest thing I have ever done in my life, I have to tell you. Anyway, so now I get to stop being a keynote speaker and I get to be your facilitator again. So I have to remember my notes and I have to tell you some important things. So the first thing I have to tell you is if you haven't, who has never been to a WASH conference before? Oh dear, oh this could be bad. Who has been to 3 or more WASH conferences? Okay, so look around if you've never been here before. These are your people. Follow these people. So the point about this conference is it's all about you. It really is about collaboration. This is the only session where you don't get to speak and make a fuss. Everywhere else we want you to speak. We want you to go places on time. We want you to stay in sessions and really engage because it's really all about you having a conversation. We'll try and keep to time. Who's downloaded the conference app? Okay, who over the age of 50 has downloaded the conference app? Well done, you get a special credit. Okay, very good, well done. If you haven't downloaded the conference app and you can bear to, please do. In the conference app, you will find all sorts of things, including a really disturbingly competitive league table about how engaged you are with the conference app. I was 3rd for a while, and now I'm 8th, so I think the whole thing is a bit bogus, really. But anyway, go and engage in the app. Most importantly, please use the app to give feedback when you've been in the sessions. There's an online tool for giving quick feedback on the sessions, and that really helps us to improve the conference in future. If you really don't want to use the app for that purpose, there are paper feedback forms. In your tag that you've got around your neck, you will find voting slips, which you will need this afternoon. At the end of the afternoon session, you'll get to see the student videos, and then we'll ask you to vote on the student videos. And then you will go to the poster reception, and we'll ask you to vote on your favourite poster. So please don't lose those voting slips. Also, in your programme, there are 3 loose sheets of paper, which is the information about the national programmes that are the subject of the panel this afternoon. We've asked our panellists not to give us a long exposition on the individual programmes. We're going to be talking much more about how you get a national programme to actually work. But it would be very helpful if you could just glance through those before the panel, just to give yourself a little bit of background information. There are no fire alarms scheduled while we are here. So if you hear the fire alarm go off, it'll either be because I can't take it anymore and I've just broken the thing, or it'll be because there is genuinely a fire. And in both those cases, you probably want to vacate the building. The conference venue staff are the fire marshals. So please follow the instructions of BCC staff. In the event of a fire. There are clearly fire doors marked at the back of this auditorium, for example. Please don't use the lifts. I would suggest don't use the escalators either, because they go at variable speeds and I find them a bit weird. So I would use the stairs if I were you. I think that's all I had for now. Go and enjoy your tea. Please go to the next session in good time. We'll really appreciate seeing you at the next sessions. And if there are any queries or problems, you can come and ask me, or you can go to the registration desk. Thank you very much.
Are you down, did it, down, did it, down, did it, down, down, down? Down, did it, down, did it,